NFL coaches still show this play in film rooms, not to teach players what to do, but to teach them what never to do. 1 yard, one decision, 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, a dynasty died, a legend was broken, and one call became the most controversial moment in Super Bowl history. This is not just a football story. This is about one man, one call, 1 second, and why 10 years later, nobody has forgiven it. Super Bowl 49, February 1st, 2015. University of Phoenix Stadium, Glendale, Arizona, the biggest stage in American sports. 2 teams, 2 dynasties. One would leave as legends, one would leave broken. Seattle wasn't just a football team. They were a machine built to destroy. Back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. The most feared defense in NFL history, the Legion of Boom. And a quarterback named Russell Wilson, who had already held the Lombardi Trophy in his hands just 1 year before. They didn't come to compete, they came to repeat. New England had Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and something to prove. This was a dynasty under siege, facing accusations, facing doubt, facing a Seahawks team that many believed was about to end their era forever. Then came the moment. 26 seconds left, Seahawks ball, Patriots 1 yard line. For Seattle trailing by 4, and standing in the backfield, Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, a man who had run through, over and through NFL defenses all season long. The entire stadium knew what was coming. Every analyst knew, every fan knew, even the Patriots knew. 1 yard, 1 run, 1 Super Bowl. And then Pete Carroll made a call. Not Marshawn Lynch, not beast mode, not the run every single person on earth was expecting. He threw the ball. What happened next shocked the world, but what most people still don't know is why. And the answer will change how you see this moment forever. Before we get to that call, you need to feel exactly what was in that stadium on February 1st, 2015. Because without that feeling, you can't understand why what happened next broke something that never fully healed. The 2014 Seattle Seahawks were not just good, they were historically dominant. Their defense that year gave up the fewest points of any team in the entire NFL. Marshawn Lynch had rushed for over 1,300 yards, running through defenders like they weren't there. And they were the defending Super Bowl champions. These weren't just players chasing a ring. They were a dynasty in the making. They weren't just hungry. They were 1 yard away from immortality. But New England refused to die. Tom Brady, calm, cold, surgical, had already engineered 3 fourth-quarter drives that day. The Patriots had clawed back from a 10-point deficit. Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, drive after drive after drive. Brady wasn't panicking. Brady was never panicking. That was the most terrifying thing about him. Then the universe seemed to intervene. 2 minutes left. Ricardo Sherman tipped the ball. It bounced off a defender, hit the ground, bounced again, and somehow, Jermaine Kearse caught it while lying flat on his back. The crowd exploded. Players on the Seahawks sideline couldn't believe what they'd just seen. It felt like destiny. It felt like Seattle was meant to win the Super Bowl, like the football gods themselves had decided. Seattle was at the 5 yard line. The noise in that stadium was physical. You didn't just hear it, you felt it in your chest. Why Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, had already rushed for 102 yards that day. 102 yards of broken tackles, 102 yards of defenders bouncing off him like he was made of concrete. He was unstoppable. Everyone in that building knew it. Everyone watching at home knew it. Everything pointed to one thing: give the ball to Lynch, run it in, win the championship. It was so obvious, even the Patriots were preparing for it. So what happened next makes no sense, unless you understand one thing nobody ever talks about. Everyone remembers this as Pete Carroll's moment of madness, but that's not what it was. Pete Carroll didn't panic. Pete Carroll didn't guess. Pete Carroll made a calculated, logical football decision, and that, ironically, is what makes it so much more painful. New England knew exactly what was coming. Defensive coordinator Matt Patricia had loaded the box, stacking extra defenders right at the line of scrimmage. A wall of Patriots defenders, built for one purpose, built for one man: stop Marshawn Lynch. This was Bill Belichick doing what Bill Belichick always does, taking away your best option before you even call the play. So Carroll looked at the field, and he saw something. On the right side, Ricardo Lockett, one of Seattle's fastest receivers, lined up against Malcolm Butler, a rookie cornerback. An undrafted rookie cornerback who had barely played all season. And that same slant route, it had already worked against Butler earlier in the game. Carroll turned to offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell. They didn't need Lynch. They had a mismatch. They had a shortcut to the end zone. At least, that's what they thought. Here's what most people never think about. New England still had a timeout left. If Seattle ran Lynch and he scored, the Patriots would use that timeout, get the ball back with time remaining, and Tom Brady would have a chance to respond. But a quick pass, if it works, touchdown, game over, New England has no time to react. If it's incomplete, clock stops automatically. Seattle still has Lynch, still has their timeouts, still controls everything. It was a genius play call. A calculated risk with a safety net built in. On paper, it was actually the smarter call. In theory, smart football. But theory and reality collided at the worst possible moment. Because Malcolm Butler, the unknown rookie they'd picked on, had seen this exact play before. Not in a game, in practice. The day before the Super Bowl. And he was ready. Malcolm Butler almost wasn't there. Let that sink in for a second. The man who would make the most important play in Super Bowl history almost didn't make the roster. Malcolm Butler didn't come from Alabama, or Ohio State, or any school NFL scouts were watching. He came from West Alabama, a small program most people had never heard of. He went undrafted, not selected by a single team in the entire NFL draft. He almost quit football completely, but he kept going, kept working, kept believing that somewhere there was a place for him. He earned a spot on the Patriots practice squad, then the roster, and then, barely, the Super Bowl roster. He was the last man anyone expected to decide a championship. But here's what nobody in that stadium knew. 3 days before the Super Bowl, during a Patriots practice session, Malcolm Butler had lined up against that exact route, that exact formation, that exact play. Bill Belichick had studied Seattle's tendencies, identified that slant route as a threat, and made his players practice against it until they could stop it in their sleep. So when Russell Wilson lined up, when Lockett went in motion, when that formation appeared, Butler had seen this before. His body already knew what to do before his brain finished thinking. Wilson took the snap. 1 second. He looked right, found Lockett on the slant, released the ball, and Malcolm Butler, who had no business being on that field, who had almost quit, who nobody had heard of, moved before the ball left Wilson's hand. He jumped the route. Perfect read, perfect timing. It's perfect positioning, arms out. The ball hit his hands. Interception. For 1 full second, the entire stadium couldn't process what had just happened. Then it exploded. On the Seahawks sideline, players fell to their knees. Marshawn Lynch stood frozen. Pete Carroll stood frozen. Russell Wilson stood frozen. 26 seconds left, 1 yard away. Beast mode on the sideline. And it was over. An undrafted rookie, from a school nobody had ever heard of, had just ended a dynasty in 2 seconds, with one play, forever. When reporters asked Butler what happened, he looked at them and said, "I just made a play." Simple, devastating, historic. The most important 2 seconds in Super Bowl history. Described in 5 words by the man who lived them. The interception lasted 2 seconds. The silence that followed lasted much longer. Russell Wilson walked to the sideline. This was a man who had never lost his composure in his entire career. A man whose faith was unshakable. A man who smiled in the face of every obstacle he'd ever encountered. He sat down, helmet off, head in his hands, and he wept. Not quietly, not privately, in front of 70,000 people and 114 million watching at home. It wasn't his call. Pete Carroll made the decision. Darrell Bevell drew up the play, but Russell Wilson threw the pass. And in the brutal mathematics of professional football, the quarterback always carries what his hands release. He didn't blame Carroll publicly. He didn't make excuses. He just carried it, quietly, for years. Wilson went on to have an extraordinary career. More wins, more comebacks, more moments of brilliance that reminded the world who he was. But it didn't matter. Walk into any press conference, any interview, any media session. The question always came, Russell, about the Super Bowl, about that pass. Every single time, for years, he answered it with grace every time. But you could see it in his eyes, the weight of 2 seconds that refused to become the past. And then there was Marshawn Lynch. While Wilson wept, Lynch stood, arms at his sides, eyes fixed on the field, jaw tight. The cameras found his face and never let it go. Because that expression, that single photograph, said everything no words could. He had been ready. He had been right there. 1 yard, 1 carry. One moment that was supposed to be his. And they never gave him the ball. Well, to this day, that image of Lynch on that sideline is one of the most reproduced photographs in NFL history. Not because of what happened, because of what didn't. Lynch never said much about it publicly. He didn't have to. His face said everything. And somewhere in that silence, in that image of a man standing 1 yard from immortality, was the real tragedy of February 1st, 2015. Not just a lost Super Bowl, a lost legacy. A moment that belonged to him, that was taken before he could claim it. 10 years later, the debate has never stopped. Was it the worst call in Super Bowl history? Or was Pete Carroll just one undrafted rookie away from being called a genius? Statistically, passing on second down from the 1 yard line succeeds roughly 55% of the time in the NFL. Running it, even with Lynch, is not the guaranteed touchdown everyone pretends it was. And the timeout logic was real. If the pass fell incomplete, clock stops. Seattle still has Lynch, still has 2 more plays, still controls the game. On paper, and in the data, it wasn't a crazy call. It was a calculated one. We established that. But here's where it gets truly haunting. Here is the brutal truth that nobody wants to say out loud. If Malcolm Butler hesitates for half a second, if his foot slips, if he reads it wrong, if he blinks, Ricardo Lockett catches that ball. Seattle scores, Super Bowl champions. And Pete Carroll is standing on the confetti, holding the trophy, being called the most brilliant offensive mind in NFL history. The same decision, the same call, the same play, a completely different legacy. Let that stop you cold, because it means the difference between genius and disaster, between legend and disgrace, was not the decision. It was one man's reaction time, measured in milliseconds. That is what makes those 2 seconds so impossible to let go of. It wasn't incompetence, it wasn't stupidity, it wasn't even a mistake. It was one man, one undrafted rookie from West Alabama, rising to meet history at the exact moment history called his name. Malcolm Butler didn't just make a play. He became the reason a dynasty ended, the reason a legend is still haunted, the reason we are still talking about 1 yard, 10 years later. The difference between legend and disaster is sometimes not strategy, not talent, not preparation. Sometimes it is just 2 seconds. 2 seconds that can define a career, break a dynasty, create a legacy, or take one away forever. Pete Carroll knows it. Russell Wilson knows it. Marshawn Lynch knows it. And Malcolm Butler, the man who nobody saw coming, knows it better than anyone. The final score was 28-24. New England. The Patriots dynasty continued. Tom Brady got his 4th ring. Bill Belichick got his 4th championship. And Seattle's dream of back-to-back titles, the dynasty that was supposed to define a generation, died on a 1 yard line. In 2 seconds, forever. Pete Carroll has been asked about that call hundreds of times, in press conferences, in interviews, in quiet moments with reporters who couldn't let it go. And every single time, he gives the same answer. He would make the same call again, because the logic was sound, because the data supported it, because in his mind, he made the right decision. Think about what it takes to say that, to carry that moment, that image of Wilson weeping, Lynch standing frozen, Eat Butler celebrating, and still look someone in the eye and say, "I'd do it again." Whether that is conviction or denial, only Pete Carroll knows. Maybe he's right. Maybe the outcome doesn't define the decision. Maybe logic matters more than result. Maybe in some parallel universe, Butler slips. Lockett catches it. Carroll is a genius. But we don't live in that universe. We live in the one where NFL history doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about percentages, or timeouts, or what should have worked. History only remembers one thing, the result, and it will remember those 2 seconds forever. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know why it matters. This wasn't just a football play. It was a reminder that the difference between legacy and regret, between immortality and what if, can come down to 2 seconds. One decision, one rookie, one play that nobody saw coming. Leave a comment below with just one word that describes those 2 seconds. And if you want more stories like this, stories where football becomes something bigger than football, subscribe, because the next one is already waiting. And I promise you, it hits just as hard.